Hello and welcome to the FedNow Service webinar. I'm Jean Rourke from the Federal Reserve and I'll be your moderator. Before turning the call over to our speakers, I'll run through our call logistics. If you haven't joined us through the webinar yet, go ahead and click the link you received after registering. For the best webinar experience, use the FAQ document, which can be found using the Materials button in the webinar player page. I'll highlight a few important notes for you. You can listen to the audio through your PC speakers or through the phone. If you use the phone option, slides will not sync with audio unless you change a setting. You can change that setting by selecting the gray gear located on the upper right corner of the slide window just above the presentation. From there, you should see a few options in the media chooser, and you should select the phone option, but that's only if you're listening to the audio through your phone. You can expand the size of your slides, and to do that, use the Maximize button in the upper right corner of the slide window located on the webinar player page. And if you'd like to submit a question, use the Ask Question button, also located on the webinar player page. Okay, with all those logistics out of the way, I'd like to turn our call over to Nick Stanescu, Senior Vice President and FedNow Business Executive, to start today's webinar.
Thank you, Jean. Welcome, everyone, and thank you all for joining us today. It's been just over a month since we announced the features and functionality of the new FedNow service via the latest Federal Register notice. So we are really excited to have you here with us today so we can provide more details about the service and also to answer the questions that you might have about FedNow. Let's move on to the agenda slide, please. Today we'll spend quite a bit of time with an overview of the FedNow service, and also we want to highlight some of the key features and functionality. We're also going to provide information about how we will continue to engage with the industry going forward, and at the same time how the industry can prepare for FedNow. And then we're going to wrap up with the Q&A session, but we're going to answer some questions as we go through the session as well. Moving on to the next slide, slide 3, please. Before we go into the product description, I would also like to take this opportunity to introduce my colleagues who will join me in providing updates today. Dan Baum is the head of product management for FedNow. Allison Bowler, Vice President and Industry Readiness Lead on the FedNow team. And we also have Kirsten Wells, who's a Principal Economist on the FedNow Oversight Coordination and Strategy team from the Board of Governors. So let me start off on the next slide with an overview of the FedNow service. The objectives of the service are to enable financial institutions of all sizes and in all communities across the country to provide efficient and safe instant payment services on a continuous basis, around the clock, every day of the year. So our broad reach, which is based on the connection and also relationships with more than 10,000 financial institutions, will support a nationwide infrastructure for instant payments. I can tell you that the service continues to be a high priority for the Federal Reserve, and as previously mentioned, on August 6th, the Board of Governors announced the features and functionality of the FedNow service in the latest Federal Register notice. If you're not able to join us for the event, you can find materials related to the announcements, also including the recorded webinar. You can find that on fednow.org. Throughout this year, we've been really on a listening tour, meeting with organizations of all sizes, both banks and non-banks, and taking in a lot of feedback and input regarding the potential functionality and use cases for instant payments. We are absolutely elated with the active engagement and also the responses and feedback that we have received to date from all segments of the industry. And personally, I think that this shows the industry's commitment to supporting our collective efforts to continue improving and evolving the U.S. payment system, and FedNow is a big part of that effort. So we drew very heavily from this input and industry feedback that we received to inform how we are shaping the service, how we are prioritizing and developing features and functionality of the service, and certainly we're going to talk about that next. I'll be remiss if I don't mention the fact that the service design does reflect the goals that align with our public mission, which certainly include accessibility, safety, and efficiency. And we're going to talk through throughout this program in terms of how the design of the FedNow service is directly in support of these three goals. Next slide, please. We are taking a phased approach to the deployment of the FedNow service, with additional features and enhancements provided in phases after release 1, so after the initial launch. And we strongly believe that this phased approach will ensure that core features and functionalities are brought to the market as quickly as possible, while at the same time it provides flexibility to adjust, augment these features or add new features in response to the industry needs or changes to technology that will occur over time. So this first release of FedNow service is going to provide that core clearing and settlement functionality, the connectivity, and we're going to cover that in more detail shortly. And that's going to meet the market needs and help financial institutions and service providers that support them to manage the transition to 24/7, 365 operations, and also to leverage FedNow in developing their business cases and for instant payments. With this first release, participants are certainly going to be able to support a number of transaction types and a broad set of use cases for their customers. But the release will also include additional optional features which we heard from the industry that are highly desirable to the market and will help also drive adoption and increase the reach of the service. This includes, for example, fraud prevention tools, also the ability to join initially as a receive-only participant in the FedNow service. We're going to support request for payment capability and tools to support participants in their handling of payment inquiries, reconcilement, and also how they manage exceptions. As we proceed with the development of FedNow service, and I must say that we're making really strong progress in that, we will continue to engage the industry to gain input on service features and designs as we progress, but also we'll provide updates as we reach key milestones. So with that, let me turn it over to Dan to get a layer deeper into the details of the FedNow product features and functionality. Dan?
Thanks, Nick. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dan Baum. I'm the head of product management for the FedNow service, and it's my pleasure to be speaking to all of you this afternoon and to get the opportunity to describe our new service. As we move into slide 7, I wanted to start by first covering an overview of how the FedNow service can be accessed before, as we go through a couple of the next slides, getting into how we envision the service being supporting some of the potential use cases. So the Federal Reserve is committed to ensuring the accessibility of the FedNow service to banks of all sizes across the country. This objective is reflected in the design choices we are making and is now and will continue to be a guiding principle for defining our onboarding processes. As with all current Federal Reserve Bank services, the FedNow service will be available to depository institutions eligible to hold accounts at the Federal Reserve banks. Participants will be able to designate a service provider or agent to submit or receive payment instructions on their behalf, and participants will be able to settle payments in the account of a correspondent, if they choose to do so. Merchants, consumers, or non-bank payment service providers can access the service through depository institutions much as they do today with our other payment systems. We understand that financial institutions and their customers are at various levels of readiness for instant payments, and so have included features that will support flexible adoption of the FedNow service. And those features importantly include an option, as Nick said just a few minutes ago, to enroll as a receive-only participant. This option will allow a participant to receive instant payments and to send certain messages, like a request for payment, but not to originate credit transfers. We expect that this option may help banks implement the FedNow service, especially smaller financial institutions, as they gain experience with instant payments over time. The FedNow service, alongside a private sector service, will also give financial institutions the options of choosing a service or connecting to more than one service, a choice they have today for all existing payments. Institution size does not determine which service they can use. Financial institutions of any size can use the FedNow service. Maybe before we jump into use cases, let's pause to answer a few questions that have been submitted in advance during the registration process for the webinar.
All right, thank you, Dan. Our first question is for Nick. Nick, which vendors will be supporting the FedNow service?
Thanks, Jane. So we are currently finalizing our technology strategy, and I can tell you that the strategy will incorporate a blend of internal Federal Reserve resources and also partnerships with the external vendor. Our intent is to prioritize using resources and technologies to create this flexible infrastructure that will be able to evolve to meet the current and future market needs, and also support the phased approach that we envision for the service. As we formalized our technology strategy, we're also going to continue to keep the industry informed on our progress, as I mentioned previously.
Okay, thank you. Dan, question for you. How will the FedNow service help smaller depository institutions?
Thanks, Gene. I think this is an important question because providing payment services that are accessible to all U.S. depository institutions really benefits all payment system participants because it allows individuals, businesses that hold accounts with all of those institutions to pay each other, and that gets us to the kind of reach and ubiquity that we've talked about, and allows for the use of the system for a wide range of purposes. We do think that the Federal Reserve is uniquely positioned to help develop a safe and efficient nationwide settlement service for instant payments, and that using its existing payment infrastructure and established customer service relationships with more than 10,000 depository institutions, we can gain that reach. Since its inception, driven by its long-standing policy commitment to promote nationwide access, the Federal Reserve has extended access to depository institutions of all sizes on fair and equitable terms, including, as the question asked, small depository institutions in rural and remote areas of the country. The FedNow will facilitate access to a real-time gross settlement infrastructure for instant payments for these depository institutions, and perhaps as importantly as that, the communities that they serve. So I think maybe we'll jump back into the material. So thank you, Gene. Let's move on to cover use cases on slide 8, please. So the FedNow service is being designed to be use case agnostic, facilitating instant payment, funds transfer, and settlement in a matter of seconds, which means anytime, any day of the week, but in real time for many purposes. This gives customers greater flexibility, speed, and efficiency, and allows the receiver of funds, which could be individuals and or businesses, the ability to use them immediately. Because of the service design principle, the first release of the FedNow service will provide core clearing and settlement capabilities to support a broad range of transaction types and use cases. But based on industry feedback, we understand that account-to-account transfers and bill pay are two of the leading use cases that are most likely to gain usage early on. Financial institutions would support these use cases by working with service providers and software companies to build service that leverage the FedNow clearing and settlement functionality. And with A2A specifically, individuals will be able to conduct me-to-me or me-to-you funds transfers between checking and savings accounts, and to fund or defund stored value accounts. Similarly, businesses would be able to manage their cash position across multiple accounts and institutions. With the instant bill pay use case, end users would be able to improve cash flow management and allow for just-in-time bill payments, which we know is a critical need, moving money from customer accounts to biller accounts in a matter of seconds. The request for payment feature that we've announced will be part of the initial functionality in the FedNow service could be leveraged to support this use case. We will continue to work collaboratively with stakeholders and providers in the industry to ensure that they have the information they need about the FedNow service to build out services supporting these use cases. As we move into slide 9, I'd like to spend just a few minutes highlighting some of the functionality that will be available in Release 1, which includes both the core clearing and settlement features, and then before jumping to the initial value add features on the next slide. So in core clearing and settlement, I think it's important to note that the FedNow service is committed to using the widely accepted ISO 20022 standard and other industry best practices to help remove incompatibilities that could be a barrier to payment routing, which is a form of interoperability. That payment routing could be completed between the FedNow service and the private sector service, as an example. Use of the ISO 20022 standard will provide a common foundation for exchanging payment messages and support the exchange of rich data such as remittance information. The FedNow service will settle payments in master accounts held at the Federal Reserve banks. This means that pre-funding into a separate account is not a requirement of the service, and that avoids the operational complexity that this arrangement could introduce. A participating financial institution could also choose to settle payments in the master account of a correspondent bank if they choose. Federal Reserve will adopt a 7-day accounting regime for the FedNow service, but banks are not required to do so. To facilitate real-time and daily transaction monitoring and the management of account balances, the FedNow service will provide transaction-level and summary-level activity reports to participants and correspondent banks. These reports would also support reconcilement and other processes that are in line with the internal accounting regime of participating financial institutions, whether they use 5-day or 7-day accounting. We clearly recognize the need to ensure the right data, tools, and features are available to support reconcilement, and we'll be working with the industry over the coming months to better understand reconcilement needs and pain points, which will inform our service design as we move closer to go-to-market. So that was a lot over the last couple of slides. Maybe I'll pause again and before moving into our value-add services, see if there's other questions that we can answer. Jean.
All right, thank you, Dan. There are a couple of questions. The first is for Kirsten. What regulations may need to change to support the FedNow service?
Thanks, Jean. Yeah, we know all the payment lawyers out there are probably curious about this one. So we are looking at all of our regulations that would be impacted. There's a handful of them. Probably the most important ones are, or the most prominent ones are Reg J for funds transfers and Reg CC for funds availability. So we're looking at them all, and what we normally do when we change a regulation is that we would, go out for public comment and request comment on the changes and then finalize the changes. So we're in the process of doing that, and I would expect early next year we would be probably issuing some public notices on those changes.
Okay, great, thank you. The next question is for Dan. Dan, do you foresee instant payments being available to support point of sale both in person and in the e-commerce environment?
Thanks, Jean. I think this is a good question. And I'll start by reminding everyone, as I said a few minutes ago, that the FedNow service is being designed to be use case agnostic. So facilitating instant funds transfer and settlement in a matter of seconds in the support of multiple use cases to gain the flexibility. I will also say that one of the guiding principles of the FedNow team is to develop the service such that it can serve as a foundation for the industry to innovate upon. So we would envision, because of that, that service providers and merchants and others may innovate in manners that could provide support for point of sale over time. We will, as we've noted earlier, will continue to work collaboratively with stakeholders and providers in the industry to ensure that they have the opportunity and to provide information they need about FedNow Service to build out services supporting these use cases. Maybe in the interest of time, let's move forward to slide 10 and talk about the value-add services before we jump back into some more questions in a few minutes. So as we begin our discussion of value-add services, I'd like to start by maybe discussing the one that I know is front of mind for a lot of people, which is the fraud prevention controls service, and then we'll get to liquidity management in a few minutes. So with fraud prevention services, while we suspect that participating financial institutions will want to and most often choose to continue to be the primary line of defense against fraud, the FedNow service plans to offer additional fraud prevention capabilities, which the feedback that we've gained to date has revealed was highly desired for the initial release. The fraud prevention controls at the initial release will include the ability to set lower transaction value limits, specify conditions under which transaction would be rejected, and to provide fraud reporting features and functionality to participants. The first two capabilities will allow financial institutions to proactively set parameters that limit transaction activity based on the knowledge of their own customer base. The third capability will provide information that participants can then incorporate into their own fraud monitoring regime. Over time, we will continue to explore other features that could be made available as part of future releases, as Nick mentioned earlier, which would aid participants in managing fraud risk. Examples of those are value limits that could be tailored to certain use cases, aggregate value or volume limits to specific periods, velocity checking and the like, and then centralized monitoring performed by the FedNow service by potentially leveraging advanced statistical methods, historical patterns to identify fraudulent individual payments or patterns of payments. In this space, we're broadly talking about using machine learning and other scientific methods to explore fraud. To support efficient liquidity management in a 24/7/365 environment, the FedNow service will offer a liquidity management tool as a core feature of the service. This FedNow liquidity management tool will enable participants to transfer funds between one another to support liquidity needs for instant payments as they may occur during the regular course of business. Further, given the importance of liquidity management for instant payment services, participants in a private sector joint account-based instant payment service will be able to access the FedNow liquidity management tool functionality without being required to join as a full FedNow participant. Release 1 will also include additional features to enhance the experience for participants, like a user interface that participants will be able to use to support data needs. The interface will be available to financial institutions and provide the ability to query transactions or set certain parameters such as fraud controls. Additionally, to support financial institutions as they transition to 24/7/365 operation, other information will be supported through the user interface. Importantly, based on feedback gained through public comments and the ongoing listening tour that Nick referenced earlier, we understand too that there's a lot of interest in enabling person-to-person payments via the FedNow service, what is generally referred to as P2P or peer-to-peer. We appreciate that originating a payment using only the public alias of a receiver has become an increasingly common way to send money to others, friends and family. And while we agree this is a desirable feature, in order for us to balance kind of the desired functionality with time to market, we will not include directory service or other approaches to facilitate alias-based payments at launch. We will look to include such supplemental features in a future release, however. The service will be able to transmit alias-based payments if the payments are initiated by industry participants that use other directory services in the market at initial release. That would be completed if the alias was converted to traditional routing instructions prior to the payment being submitted to the FedNow service. Moving to slide 11, after the initial launch, the Reserve Banks will intend to offer additional features and functionality that will further address the Reserve Bank's accessibility, safety, and efficiency objectives, while also expanding the number of unique use case requirements directly supported by FedNow functionality. You can see them listed there, but additional features that we will explore include the Fed directory I just spoke to, informational and transactional APIs that will support the sharing of information with our customers, the ability to support bulk payments, which will enable payroll use cases, enhanced remittance information, which will support B2B use cases, and then additional controls to improve the safety and experience, such as additional fraud prevention controls. I spoke to this a little earlier, enhanced reporting and resolution and case management to manage exceptions. So let's pause one more time or not maybe one more time, but again for a couple more questions, Jean, if we can.
Of course. Thank you so much, Dan. All right. This question is for Allison. Allison, how can the industry continue to influence the development of the service?
Great, thanks, Jean. As Dan and Nick both mentioned, the collaboration that we've received overall from the industry has really been critical, and we really appreciate the support. We look forward to continuing to engage with you all, and we commit to remain, transparent as we update you on our progress to deliver the service. One way that we've really worked to gather industry feedback is through the FedNow community. And this is a group of industry stakeholders which today represents over 500 members from 400 different organizations across the payment industry. And each of the individuals and entities in this group has represented a variety of expertise, viewpoints, and has represented many different industry segments. So we look forward to continuing to work with you all to help inform the service and the design to influence the ongoing product development roadmap. And we will be reaching out to work with you to consult with you on service features, implementation plans, and readiness for onboarding.
All right. Thank you, Allison. The next question is for Dan. Dan, what kind of testing or pilots will you be doing, and how can my bank be involved?
Thanks, Jean. So we are actively working on establishing a pilot program and testing approach, which we expect to have ready well in advance of the launch of the FedNow service. I say well in advance because we expect the first phase of the pilot program will begin in the near term, with financial institutions and service providers serving in what we're calling an advisory capacity as we work through the operational details of the service, a lot of which Allison just spoke to. That advisory group will then be followed by the more traditional testing and live pilot activities that you would anticipate. As we finish working through our pilot planning, details in the pilot program and testing approach, including information relative to the question on how your organization can be involved, will be communicated through the FedNow community. So we encourage you to join the community if you haven't already. Maybe to keep the flow going, I'll hand it off to my colleague, Allison Baller, who will talk about details related to the FedNow community that I just spoke to, as well as readiness. Allison?
Great. Sure. Thanks, Dan. I appreciate it. Let's move to slide 13, and I'm going to share some ideas on how you can prepare for the service and also describe some of the steps you can take to ensure that you are ready. It's really important to start planning now. One of the ways you can do that is by seeking out education on instant payments, and to date we have published a fair amount of material in this space on our website, but we will continue to update the website with additional information to keep you up to speed. We also encourage you to build awareness amongst stakeholders in your institution and also to begin reviewing your existing customer-facing processing and accounting systems. We encourage you to take steps to begin to understand the benefits of instant payments. What are the key use cases that you're interested in? Thinking about evaluating the return on investment or ROI as you think through each of these use cases. And financial institutions that are interested in instant payments should consider the potential impact of incorporating this service into your financial services offerings. And there's many, of course, technical considerations that one would need to consider, such as changes in processes to include as we roll out a 7-day accounting regime to record and report end-of-day balances for each calendar day. And then it's also important to consider any of the operational implications of a 24/7 by 365 processing environment. Dan also mentioned the importance of thinking about what type of implementation might be best for your institution. Are you looking to take an all-in approach and potentially start by enabling send and receive, or do you want to start with a more staged implementation and just begin with receive only? These are all trade-offs that you can consider as we roll out more information about the service and help work with you to gauge the pros and cons of the different choices. An instant payment service enables the immediate transfer and settlement of funds day and night, weekend and weekdays. And therefore, it has the potential to become widely used. And we believe this will yield significant economic benefits, not only for individuals, but for businesses, which will yield more flexibility in the management of money and enable users to make time-sensitive payments. So with that, I'd like to turn to slide 15 and talk a little bit about ways that either you can stay engaged with us or get more engaged with the Fed as we continue to evolve the service. The FedNow community members have many different opportunities to engage with our team through both the community as well as several working groups. And the working groups are short-term teams that we convene on various topics to focus on, and then we work through these groups to help tease out best-in-class ideas in terms of development tasks or priorities on how to achieve certain challenges. Also, as Dan mentioned, we are very, very excited to be announcing shortly a pilot program, and this will enable users to ensure readiness for testing and production launch. There's many different ways to participate in this pilot opportunity, and we will be sharing additional details around this. You can act as an advisory capacity to help inform features, functions, processes, and the roadmap. We are excited to work with you to participate in pre-production testing and provide feedback. And there's an opportunity to exchange live transactions as we move closer to launch in a closed-loop pilot. And then finally, everyone will have an opportunity to become an early adopter of the FedNow service. So like I said, we'll share more details with the community in an upcoming announcement in the next few weeks. Participation in the pilot program will provide some early adopter advantages, and we look forward and encourage you all to apply. This ideally will be a group that represents different types of institutions, service providers across multiple markets, and reaches coverage of different customer segments that will enable us to test a variety of use cases. And also, we are eager and excited to have a group that represents the FedNow adoption and reach that we are targeting. So we do expect, and we're excited about the announcement of the pilot program. We may not be able to accommodate everyone who's interested given the high-touch nature of the program, but we do encourage all interested organizations to be early adopters of the service. And then finally, I'll just wrap up by sharing with you, you can always stay engaged by submitting a FedNow service form on our website, and that will enable you to join a mailing list and receive regular updates. So with that, let me turn it back over to Jean to see if there's been any additional questions that have come in the meantime.
Yes, thank you so much. We do have a question for you, Allison. Who should join the FedNow community?
So the community is open to individuals who are interested in committing their time and expertise to helping to shape the success of the FedNow service. So we are open to invite constituents such as product managers, strategists, operational executives across many different types of organizations, financial institutions, technology firms, corporate treasury functions, and the like. And we are certainly keen to have a diversity of folks included across the various segments to help us continue to shape and evolve the offering.
Okay, thank you for that. And Allison, this next question is also for you. What kind of involvement and responsibilities will FedNow community members have?
So the responsibilities are going to depend on the level of participation that you as a member decide to commit to the program. So there will be specific members that we reach out to that have needed expertise, and those members can provide feedback through focus groups, work groups, conference calls, virtual meetings, surveys, and other channels. The other way to get involved is as you fill out your participant profile, we will use that to solicit input and try to gauge what kind of participation you're interested in, your experience and expertise, and we'll leverage that to help pull you into the appropriate work groups and feedback sessions on features, functions, roadmap, etc. Now we will turn, I believe there's been some other questions that have come into the queue as we've gone through some of the charts. So should I turn it over to you, Jean?
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you, Allison. All right, this next question is for Nick. Nick, how will the FedNow service make instant payments safer in the United States?
Thanks, Jean. First, let me start by saying that a safe payment system is absolutely crucial to both economic growth and financial stability. And that's because the effective operation of the markets for virtually just every good and service is dependent on the smooth functioning of the banking and payment systems. And with that as a background, I think the FedNow service will promote safety of the U.S. payment system in multiple ways. First of all is in terms of times of crisis. So as instant payments and the use of instant payments grows in the United States, the development of the FedNow service is going to allow the Federal Reserve to retain its ability to provide that kind of stability and also support to the banking systems and the broader economy during crisis. Also, as the operator of the service, the Federal Reserve was also going to be in a position to promote the development and also the implementation of industry-wide standards for disputing, let's say, fraudulent instant payment transfers, for example. So being that operator also allows that kind of deep down knowledge of the issues and an ability to promote the development of those standards. Lastly, the development of the service can also enhance the safety of the payment system at large by promoting resilience through redundancy. So having FedNow in the market allows depository institutions to be able to join multiple services and to establish backup connections in case of one of those services has any kind of operational outages or really any kind of problem. But I think this all starts with us bringing a service into the market that is not just of high quality, but also is very secure.
Okay, thank you so much, Nick. Our next question is for Kirsten about regulations. FedNow will be mandatory to what kind of financial institution, banking, credit union, etc. Is this intended for small payment amounts? How is it envisioned to coexist or augment or take away from the current wire transfer payments?
Thanks, Jean. So first of all, this service is not mandatory. Like all of our payment services, it's completely optional if a bank chooses to use them. So that's probably important to say at the beginning. So in terms of usage, what we are anticipating is that the payments going over FedNow are largely going to be retail payments, which we consider to be smaller dollar. Although if you think about ACH, you know, there are some sort of larger business payments that go over that service as well. So we do anticipate a range of, you know, payments from, you know, $10 if it's a person-to-person payment, you know, up to $3,000 if it's, you know, more of a business payment. And there will be a transaction limit ultimately that, which we haven't determined yet, but that will put an upper bound. And so in that regard, you know, in terms of wire transfers, we don't expect there to be any or very little substitution between wire payments and FedNow Service payments, primarily because wires tend to be sort of much larger dollar corporate trade payments or interbank payments. And so we anticipate that FedNow is going to coexist with wire transfer and that they will both, you know, be around for the long term. And I should note as well that in particular for FedNow, this service is being designed so that that it will provide the information that the sending and the receiving banks need to be able to update their customer accounts in real time. And that's probably different, right, than what is true for wire transfer payments. And so this service is being designed from an end-to-end perspective, from a sender to their bank, through the service, to the receiving bank, to the receiver. And the ISO standard that we're using to design the service enables that type of, you know, end-to-end clearing, which is the, you know, updating of the accounts of the participants or the end users, as well as, you know, the settlement. And so it's quite different from FedWire, our wire transfer service, in that regard.
Okay, thank you so much. This next question is for Dan. Dan, what fraud practices or systems will be implemented, and will fraud reporting be mandatory?
Thanks, Jean. So I spoke to fraud management services that we intend to include in the initial release. And they will broadly include things like the value cap that Kirsten just spoke to, as well as the ability to reject items if they are on what sometimes people call a negative list, or closed accounts list, or bad accounts list, as well as other conditions that you'd be able to set as part of the initial release. We do, as Nick introduced the discussion with, we do intend to iterate the fraud services and continue to add functionality over time, such that we will be able to bolster and react to the changing fraud landscape that we all experience in our payments environment. So more to come on that front, and more detail to be added. The vision that I introduced earlier was to look as far into this as implementing in the future at some point the network level monitoring, such that we use following patterns and algorithms in machine learning type capabilities to monitor network level fraud. There's a question. Part of the question was whether fraud reporting would be mandatory. I think there's a piece of this that we would implement at a service level. So some things like the overall value cap for payment could be considered part of a fraud. It puts a cap on the exposure. There are other things that we may implement at a service level that might be rolled out in a manner that is, it becomes inherent with the service and therefore mandatory if you are a participant in the service. There are other parts that we would offer as opt-in, and more details will be released as we work through them and announced through our normal channels, FRB services and the like.
Okay, thank you, Dan. We're going to stick with you for the next question. At what point will you consider cross-border functionality?
So I think I think we hear that question a lot because we recognize that there is a desire and a demand to send payments cross-border for remittances for family members, or businesses that are doing business cross-border with other countries. So we recognize the need. I think at this point, so the answer is it's not part of the initial release, but we will continue to evaluate the costs and benefits of expanding the FedNow service to support cross-border payments in the future. Recognize it'll probably be a feature for the longer term, just given the inherent complexity and compliance issues that are associated with it, and the need for us to appropriately in the first iterations of the service to focus on obtaining all the domestic goals that we've set for ourselves as well. That was a long answer. Short answer is not at release 1, but certainly on our planning horizon, but probably not in the immediate future either.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Our next question is for Nick. Nick, will you consider allowing non-banks to participate in the service in the future?
Thanks, Jean. And that is certainly the case in some other countries. So in other countries, we are aware that non-banks may join central bank payment services. In the U.S., we have certain federal statutes and also Federal Reserve rules and policies and procedures that limit the scope of the entities that are eligible to access Federal Reserve financial services. And Dan talked a little bit about this previously, though I want to point out that although the service is going to be available only to those institutions that are eligible to hold accounts at the reserve banks, the entities that are not eligible to hold accounts at the reserve banks may nevertheless be able to act as a service provider or as agents for participants in the FedNow service. So still under the structure of the current federal statutes and rules that I mentioned previously. And based on the industry engagement and the feedback that we got to date, we do expect that we'll see this new bank and non-bank type of partnerships that are going to they're going to emerge to provide innovative end-user services that will help drive adoption of instant payments, and they'll be able to work under this structure that I mentioned.
Great, thank you, Nick. Our next question is for Dan. Dan, why is a directory service that supports alias-based P2P payments not part of the initial release of the FedNow service? How will I be able to meet customer demand for these types of payments in the near term?
Thanks, Jean. So I think this question gets close to the top of the list with every conversation we have, so I think it's an important one. And we certainly recognize the need to support P2P payments using alias-based payment initiation, so using things such as emails or phone numbers in the place of routing number and account number, so that financial institutions' customers can initiate payments safely and efficiently amongst each other, especially in the consumer space. So over the last handful of months, we've actively explored various approaches for providing the capability. I think the short answer is that given the inherent complexities associated with adding the alias-based directory functionality, we had a difficult trade-off decision to make, and therefore we chose to work on enabling alias-based payment processing and the directory functionality in parallel to developing the initial service launch functionality. So doing so allowed us to not tie the timing of the initial service launch to the completion of our work on the directory, and therefore allowed us to work on the initial launch in a much different time schedule, just given the complexities of bringing the directory services, alias-based services, to market. We do continue to explore approaches to provide this functionality in the future, and as noted earlier in my comments, are working to provide this functionality as quickly after the initial service launches as feasible. It should also be highlighted, I noted this in my earlier comments, that at launch, if a financial institution is currently using a directory provider of another, in the private sector, they can still, because of the use case agnostic design of the service, they can still use the service as long as they've converted the alias back into the traditional routing instructions before sending it into FedNow.
Okay, thank you so much, Dan. We have a question for Allison. Allison, what are things that every bank should know or be doing to get ready to use the FedNow service?
Thank you. So we've talked a lot about the importance of staying educated and continuing to check our website and read and stay up to date on all the instant payments information that we're sharing across the market. It will also be helpful to work towards generating awareness within your organization and perhaps even moving towards beginning to develop an overall product strategy that would integrate in with instant payments. As everyone knows, the rollout of a new payment service takes time, so we encourage banks to begin planning now. We also recognize that transitioning to a new payment infrastructure takes time and effort, and there's a lot of work that will go into this, but we, again, believe strongly in the broad benefits that this is going to bring to the market, both individuals and businesses, as well as to banks to enable next generation payment services. So we are very excited to continue to work with you and, again, appreciate all the ongoing support and collaboration.
Great, thank you, Allison. And our next question is for Nick. Nick, where can I find more information?
Thanks for that setup question, Jean. We wanted to into this question to wrap up the webinar. So as indicated on the slide, on slide number 17, you can find more information on the service on frbservices.org, and certainly there is a link there to the Federal Register notice that exists on the Board of Governors websites for the full FedNow Service description. There's a lot of detail in that. I also wanted to point out, we talked about the FedNow community. On FedNow.org, you can also find additional information on FedNow community and how you can join and get involved and also help you get educated on instant payments and also educate your customers as well. We're also going to make available on FedNow.org a recording of this webinar and the associated slides that have driven this conversation. So with that, just wanted to close out by saying thank you for taking the time to join the webinar today, and I look forward to your continued interest in the FedNow service. Goodbye, everyone.